On a small, isolated island in the middle of the South Pacific, nearly 1,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited land, stand nearly 1,000 massive stone statues, some over 30 feet tall, weighing up to 80 tons. For over a century, the story told about this island was a cautionary tale. A civilization that carved itself into extinction, chopping down every tree until the land could no longer support them, ending in starvation, warfare, and cannibalism. That story became one of the most famous parables in modern environmental writing. And according to a growing body of archaeological and genetic evidence published in just the last few years, it may be almost entirely wrong. This is Archive of the Ancients, and today we're separating the popular myth of Easter Island's collapse from what the evidence actually shows. Let's start with the island itself and the people who built it. Rapa Nui, as its people call it, knowing to the rest of the world as Easter Island, was settled by Polynesian seafarers who navigated against prevailing winds and currents using double-hulled canoes and traditional wayfinding, likely arriving sometime around 1200 AD. It's one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, roughly 3,500 kilometers from the coast of Chile and over 2,000 kilometers from the nearest other Polynesian island. Over the following centuries, the Rapa Nui developed a distinct culture, centered around ancestor worship, expressed through the carving of the Moai, massive stone figures believed to represent important deceased ancestors, placed on stone platforms called ahu, typically facing inland to watch over their communities. Statue construction began soon after the island was settled and increased rapidly between the early 1300s and mid-1400s. Now here's the traditional story most people have heard. Popularized largely by geographer and author Jared Diamond in his book Collapse, the ecocide theory holds that the Rapa Nui population grew rapidly, cut down the island's entire forest of millions of palm trees to move and erect their statues, triggered severe soil erosion, and by the 1600s faced a full-blown societal collapse, famine, internal warfare, and even cannibalism, reducing a population that may have peaked above 15,000 down to a fraction of that number long before Europeans ever arrived. It's a vivid story, and it became one of the most widely cited examples in environmental science of a society destroying itself through resource mismanagement. But in recent years, multiple independent lines of evidence have started to seriously challenge it. The first crack in the theory came from land use studies. A 2015 study analyzing hydrated obsidian artifacts as a proxy for settlement activity found that population changes on the island were regional rather than island-wide, correlating with local rainfall and soil quality rather than a uniform, catastrophic collapse. The researchers concluded that describing what happened as a sudden collapse was a misleading characterization of what was actually a more gradual, localized set of population shifts. Then, in 2024, came the most direct challenge yet. A team of researchers analyzed genome data from 15 ancient Rapa Nui individuals and published their findings in Nature. If a catastrophic 17th century population collapse had actually occurred, it should have left a clear genetic signature, a sharp drop in genetic diversity known as a population bottleneck. The researchers found no such signature. Instead, the genetic data showed a population that grew steadily and continuously from the 1200s all the way through to European contact in 1722, with no evidence of the dramatic crash the ecocide theory predicts.
The same study also found something else unexpected: genetic evidence that the Rapa Nui had contact and interbred with indigenous peoples of the Americas centuries before Europeans ever set foot on the island, suggesting transoceanic contact between Polynesia and South America that predates European colonization entirely, a separate and fascinating mystery in its own right. This study also found that from the 1300s to the early 1700s, the Rapa Nui population was growing at a rate of about 0.075% per year, which is not a lot, but it does show that they were able to support themselves as a continuous society. Supporting this, a study of Moai and Ahu construction timelines, led by researchers including Carl Lipo at Binghamton University, found that statue building continued at a steady pace well beyond the supposed 1600s collapse date, continuing right up to and even after European contact in 1722. Lipo's team argued this directly contradicts the collapse narrative. If society had truly fallen apart before Europeans arrived, monument construction should have stopped well before then, and it didn't. So if there wasn't a pre-contact ecological collapse, what actually happened to the population? This is where the genocide hypothesis comes in, the idea that Rapa Nui's population decline happened not before European contact, but because of it. Historical records confirm that after 1722, the island suffered repeated and devastating impacts. European-introduced diseases the population had no immunity to, and later, in the 1860s, brutal Peruvian slave-raiding expeditions that captured and removed a significant portion of the surviving population, along with the knowledge many of them carried. That said, researchers are careful not to swing too far the other way. Deforestation on the island was real. Pollen records confirm the island's palm forest declined dramatically over the centuries of Rapa Nui settlement. What's disputed isn't whether the environment changed, but whether that change caused a sudden societal collapse, or whether the Rapa Nui adapted their land use and social structures around a changing landscape without the civilization actually falling apart. Some researchers propose a middle ground view. Multiple overlapping crises, some environmental and some driven by climate patterns, followed later by a genuinely catastrophic disruption tied directly to European contact. A 2020 ecological modeling study published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B examined this middle ground directly, describing what the researchers called at least 3 distinct demographic crises in Rapa Nui's history rather than one single event. They found evidence that climate-driven changes to the island's long-term carrying capacity affected the population's per capita food supply over time, creating gradual demographic pressure well before Europeans ever arrived. But crucially, this study also found no clear evidence directly linking that pressure to the kind of abrupt, violent societal collapse the ecocide narrative describes. And there's no disputing what came after 1722 was severe. Beyond disease, the Peruvian slave raids of the 1860s were particularly devastating. Ships forcibly removed an estimated 1/3 or more of the island's remaining population to work in South American mines and plantations, and most of those taken never returned. Among those captured were reportedly some of the island's last remaining experts in reading the island's undeciphered Rongo-Rongo script, meaning the raids likely destroyed irreplaceable cultural knowledge alongside the human toll. Combined with smallpox and other introduced diseases, the Rapa Nui population is estimated to have fallen to as low as a few hundred people by the 1870s, a genuine demographic catastrophe, just one that arrived roughly a century later than the popular story claims.
What's remarkable here isn't just the new evidence. It's how much a single, dramatic narrative shaped public understanding of an entire culture for decades, based on interpretations that more recent archaeology, genetics, and demographic analysis increasingly complicate. The famous line about Rapa Nui destroying itself has been repeated in textbooks, documentaries, and environmental warnings for generations. The actual picture emerging now is messier, more resilient, and arguably more respectful of the ingenuity it took to survive on one of the most isolated islands on the planet for over 5 centuries. So here's the question we'll leave you with. Was Rapa Nui a cautionary tale of self-destruction, or a resilient society that endured for centuries only to be devastated by forces that arrived from the outside? The evidence is shifting. We want to know where you land. Drop your take in the comments below. If you enjoyed rethinking a story you thought you already knew, subscribe to Archive of the Ancients. New mysteries every week.